The Vraxian Hegemony fleet did not believe in myths. To them, the Sol system was merely a vast, underutilized resource sector, protected by the Galactic Council's restricted beacons. Commander Thrax, a 9-foot-tall reptilian with scales designed to deflect plasma fire, watched as his flagship, the World Ender, bypassed the final warning buoy. Scans show no military presence, Thrax hissed, his mandibles clicking with predatory satisfaction. The humans are a species of agricultural consultants and back-row diplomats. They apologize when you step on their feet. They are prey pretending to be participants. Commander, the sensor officer chirped nervously, a spatial distortion is opening. Directly on our bridge. Thrax drew his combat blade, but the air in the center of the bridge didn't explode. It hummed with the sound of a well-oiled machine. A blue aperture, perfectly circular and devoid of heat, opened in the deck plating. Out of the void stepped a human. He was not wearing a military uniform or power armor. He wore a sharp black suit, a white shirt, and dark glasses that hid his eyes. He carried a silver briefcase with a home-world security seal. The human didn't look at the Vraxian warriors pointing weapons at his chest. He checked a sleek analog watch on his wrist and sighed. "Good morning, Commander Thrax," the human said. His voice was calm, carrying the exhausted certainty of someone who had processed too many trespass violations this cycle. "My name is Agent K. I'm with the Bureau of Silence." "Human," Thrax roared, the sound making the bridge bulkheads vibrate. "You are in the presence of the hegemony. Why should we not vaporize you where you stand?" "Because that would be a logistical nightmare for both of us," Agent K replied, opening his briefcase to reveal a single glowing data tablet. "You've bypassed 3 warning beacons, violated the Solvency Act of 2144, and ignored the back row protocols. Usually we'd send an economist to handle this, but my boss decided your deployment pattern was intentionally provocative." Agent K adjusted his glasses. He wasn't looking at Thrax, he was looking at a small, flickering monitor on the World Ender's secondary console. "You have exactly 12 hours to turn this fleet around and jump back to hegemony space," K said, his tone shifting into something that made Thrax's survival instincts scream. "If you don't, we move from diplomatic observation to annoyance protocols." Thrax laughed, a wet gurgle of amusement. He reached out with a clawed hand and snatched the agent's tablet, crushing the fragile human device between his talons. "What will you do now, little human?" Thrax sneered. "Call for help?" Agent K looked at the shattered remains of his tablet on the floor. He took a long, slow breath through his nose. "That was a Father's Day gift from my daughter," K said quietly. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop 10 degrees. The human looked Thrax directly in his yellow eyes. "Now I'm actually getting annoyed." Suddenly, the World Ender's main view screen didn't show Earth anymore. It showed a tactical assessment of the Vraxian fleet, detailed down to the last bolt and the exact heart rate of every crew member. Agent K stood amidst the bristling weapons of the Vraxian elite, but he didn't reach for a holster or call for extraction. Instead, he did what the Bureau of Silence had perfected over decades of observation. He began mapping the room. To the Vraxians, he looked like a helpless bureaucrat. To Agent K, the bridge of the World Ender was a transparent grid of biological and mechanical vulnerabilities. "You destroyed the tablet, Commander Thrax," Agent K said, his voice dropping into a register of exhausted certainty. "In our culture, humans have stages. Stage 1 is polite patience. Stage 2 is a firm warning. You just bypassed Stage 3 and landed directly on annoyed. This is the stage where we stop being nice and start being efficient." Thrax's primary sensory stalks twitched in confusion as the human ignored the plasma rifles leveled at his head. "Efficiency? You are one biped in a cloth suit," Thrax hissed. "We have 300 warships bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. Actually, you have 298 functional ships," K corrected, not looking up from his silver briefcase. "Ship 104 has a microfracture in its primary cooling loop, and Ship 212 is currently experiencing a software lag in its targeting array that your technicians haven't noticed yet." The bridge went deathly silent as Agent K adjusted his dark glasses. He began walking slowly around the circular command table, his footsteps echoing with an authority that seemed to physically lower the temperature in the room. "Commander Thrax, you belong to the Vraxian Hegemony," K continued conversationally as if he were delivering a routine lecture. "Your species evolved in a high-gravity, nitrogen-rich environment. You require a specific blend of synthetic alkaloids to keep your secondary hearts from seizing in standard oxygen environments. I know this because the Bureau has been tracking your pharmaceutical supply chains for 30 years. Kay stopped behind Thrax's command throne. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't need a fleet. I would just need to send a single accounting error to your medical processors. Your entire bridge crew would be in cardiac arrest before you could finish your next roar. Thrax lunged, his clawed hand swinging for Kay's throat. But the human moved with a tactical prescience that defied Krellian physics. Kay leaned back exactly 3 inches, just enough for the talons to whistle past his nose, and then tapped a button on the side of his briefcase. A high-frequency pulse rippled through the bridge. It wasn't an explosion, it was a data injection. Every screen on the World Ender flickered from battle readiness to a cold, clinical display of the Hegemony's own top-secret internal files. We don't just see where you sit, Commander, Kay whispered into Thrax's auditory membrane. We see the truth behind the performance. We know your secret funding of rebels in the Mordax territories. We know about the illegal mining operations on Vraxian Prime. We know everything. Thrax pulled back, his scales turning a pale, sickly orange. The biological tell of a predator that had just realized it was being hunted. What are you? The commander stammered. We're the people who keep the peace so the rest of the galaxy doesn't have to find out what happens when Earth stops playing by the rules, Kay said, snapping his briefcase shut. Suddenly, the World Ender groaned. The ship's AI began screaming as every door on the vessel locked simultaneously. The audit had officially begun. The shards of the crushed tablet lay scattered across the deck of the World Ender, a broken gift from a distant home. Commander Thrax loomed over Agent K, his chest hollowing as he prepared another bone-shaking roar, but the sound died in his throat. The human didn't flinch, didn't shout, and didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, K stood perfectly still, closing his eyes and taking a long, slow breath through his nose. You see, Commander, humans have stages, Agent K said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried further than Thrax's scream. Stage 1 is normal behavior. We're friendly, we apologize when you step on our feet, and we wait in unreasonable lines. Stage 2 is when we tell you there's a problem, and Stage 3 is when the smile gets tight and we start counting in our heads. You just skipped all of them. Kay opened his eyes, and for the first time, Thrax saw the apex predator behind the diplomat. The human's expression was no longer bored. It was a mask of cold, clinical certainty. Now I'm actually getting annoyed, Kay stated simply. The bridge of the Vraxian flagship, usually a cacophony of clicking mandibles and humming machinery, went deathly silent. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a hull fracture or a catastrophic security breach. Across the galaxy, every species that had been around humans long enough knew what those words meant. It was the final warning before the Bureau stopped being patient and started being efficient. Annoyance protocol is now active, Kay said, tapping a silver cufflink on his sleeve. Suddenly, the World Ender's internal sensors began to scream. The ship wasn't being hit by missiles or boarded by Marines. Instead, the very mathematics of the vessel began to fail. The oxygen scrubbers didn't malfunction. They recalibrated their output to exactly 0.003% below the Vraxian survival threshold. The light fixtures didn't burn out. They began to strobe at a frequency designed to induce migraines in reptilian ocular clusters. What are you doing to my ship? Thrax gasped, his primary heart skipping a beat as he felt the air thin. We're not fighting you, Commander. That would be messy and expensive, he and Kay replied, stepping over the shattered tablet with a sigh. We're just conducting a field audit of your operational viability. It turns out when you factor in your total disregard for solvency treaties, your fleet is mathematically bankrupt. On the main view screen, the rest of the Hegemony fleet began to drift. Their engines hadn't exploded. They had simply been convinced to stop bonding atoms through a coordinated cyber logistical strike. 298 ships were now floating coffins, their reactors cold and their weapons silent. You have 11 hours left to reach the exit jump point, Kay said, checking his watch again. But since you broke my tablet, I've decided to implement a few administrative fees. Your first-tier colonies just lost their trade licenses. Thrax looked at his bridge crew, who were now trembling so hard, their scales clicked against the consoles. He realized then that the Bureau of Silence didn't need warships. They were accountants with warships, and they were about to audit the Hegemony out of existence. Sir, the Vraxian communications officer whimpered. We're receiving a message from our homeworld security. It's a list of every debt we've ever owed to Earth. Kay smiled, but his teeth were a promise of further calculation. Don't look so surprised, we told you. We're done asking nicely. The battle for the Sol system did not involve the screaming of plasma or the thunder of kinetic slugs. It was a silent, crushing demonstration of what the Bureau called tactical prescience. Every move the Vraxian fleet attempted to make was countered before the command was even finalized. Every fallback position they identified was already occupied by localized gravitational distortions, and every communications relay they tried to activate was preemptively disabled by a targeted packet of white noise. "We don't fight like warriors, Commander," Agent K said, as he watched the World Ender's tactical display turn into a cascade of red failure icons. "We fight like accountants. We've spent the last 3 cycles analyzing your systemic weaknesses, your fuel consumption patterns, and your ammunition expenditure rates." Thrax gripped the edge of his console, his claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. Around him, his crew was panicking as their weapons went offline and their shields collapsed. It wasn't just the World Ender. Across the sector, the Hegemony's 298 ships were suffering from coordinated logistical failures. Atoms seemed to forget how to bond within their reactor cores, and quantum probability itself seemed to recoil from their presence. "You are defeating us with spreadsheets?" Thrax hissed, the realization more painful than a physical wound. "Logistics is just mathematics with higher stakes," Agent K replied, checking his watch as the countdown hit the 10-hour mark. "A war that might have raged for months is being ended in less than a day because we've already calculated every outcome and removed the ones where you win. We've identified 47 different ways this engagement could end, and 46 of them involve your fleet becoming an expanding debris cloud before your next meal cycle." Agent K tapped a few keys on his briefcase, and a holographic image of the Vraxian homeworld appeared. "While you were focused on our back row status, the Bureau implemented a sector-wide embargo on your primary export routes. Your home system cannot support your current population growth without external resources, and those resources are now under Bureau administrative hold." The commander felt his secondary hearts stagger. This wasn't a military conquest. It was a total dismantling of his species' infrastructure. They were being audited out of the galaxy. "This is insane," Thrax whispered. "You would destroy a civilization over a trespass?" "No," Agent K said, his expression hardening into something ancient and predatory. "We're establishing a precedent. We want to be left alone, but if you force us to choose violence, we'll make sure it's the last choice you ever make." Suddenly, a massive energy signature, unlike anything the Vraxian sensors had ever recorded, began to emerge from the shadow of Jupiter. It wasn't a ship. It was a biological signal so powerful it made the World Ender's hull hum. "That," Kay said, looking toward the viewport, "is what we're actually keeping behind the curtain. And believe me, you don't want to see what happens when it gets hungry." Commander Thrax stared at the World Ender's primary tactical display, his reptilian eyes widening as the holographic data began to bleed into the bridge. It wasn't a standard military briefing. It was a ledger, a terrifyingly detailed record of assets that the Vraxian Hegemony's intelligence services had deemed non-existent. Agent K stood casually by the central platform, the blue light of the shadow treasury reflecting off his dark glasses. "You see, Commander, the mistake your people made, and frankly, the mistake the entire Galactic Council makes, is assuming that what we show you at the front of the room is our total capacity," Coy said, gesturing to the scrolling numbers. "You looked at our public military and saw agricultural consultants and model citizens. You never looked into the back row of our accounting." Thrax's mandibles clicked in a rhythmic tremor of shock as the totals appeared. 2 trillion Earth dollars? 800 billion Imperial credits? Annually? That is just the secret budget for homeworld security, Kay remarked with a touch of dry wit. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't have to waste resources on grand speeches about honor or military tradition. While you were building monuments to your ego, we were building 17 dreadnought-class vessels in shipyards your spies never found, because they were too busy assuming we were harmless." The display shifted from financial data to a series of containment files that made the Vraxian bridge crew physically recoil. Thrax felt his scales go pale as he viewed images of creatures that defied the fundamental laws of physics. "We call these the legacy assets," Kay explained, his voice taking on a weight that chilled the air. "The Arctic Dragon, 2 kilometers of living scales that breathe plasma hotter than a stellar core. The Metal Titans, 300 meters of bioluminescent living metal with fusion reactions occurring inside their organic cells. And this, the entity from our Pacific Ocean, which doesn't destroy ships, it simply convinces atoms that they no longer want to bond. You made bargains with these monsters? Thrax stammered, his secondary heart skipping a beat. No, Commander, Kay replied, leaning in until his sunglasses were inches from Thrax's face. We became the monsters that other monsters make deals with. Earth is a 4.5 billion-year-old death world. We didn't climb to the top of the food chain because we were the smartest. We got there by being terrifying enough to make everything else on that planet sign a treaty. Kay tapped a final icon on the display, revealing a map of the Vraxian Hegemony. Over 3,000 red dots pulsed across their territory. Those are Bureau agents embedded in your Senate, your tactical schools, and your logistics centers. They aren't there to kill you. They are there to ensure that when we decide to conduct an audit, the result is already decided before the first shot is fired. You weren't defeated by a fleet today, Thrax. You were defeated through accounting. Suddenly the World Ender groaned as if the vacuum of space were pressing inward. The massive energy signature from Jupiter was no longer a dot on the screen. It was a shadow looming over the viewport. The audit is moving to Phase 2, Kay said, snapping his briefcase shut with a sound like a guillotine blade. And now, we need to discuss human justice. You're going to stand trial, Commander, and you're going to wish we had simply vaporized you. Thrax looked at the viewport, and for the first time, he saw not a ship, but a massive iridescent eye opening in the void. The transition was instantaneous. One moment, Commander Thrax was standing on the bridge of the World Ender, surrounded by the hum of failing systems and the looming shadow of a celestial predator. The next, he was seated in a room of absolute clinical white. There were no bars, no shackles, and no guards. Only a single obsidian table and Agent K, who was calmly pouring a dark, steaming liquid from a thermos into a ceramic mug. We call this human justice, K said, the steam curling around his dark glasses. It isn't about physical pain. We find that's remarkably inefficient for producing long-term behavioral changes. Instead, we focus on the one thing your species has spent centuries avoiding: accountability. Thrax tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy, as if the gravity of the room were tied to his own guilt. You cannot hold a commander of the hegemony in this cage. This is a violation of the accords ignored the moment you entered our system. Kay interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut hull plating. He slid a data tablet across the obsidian surface. It didn't show star charts. It showed faces. Billions of them. These are the 3 billion people our species lost during the last hegemony-style expansion into our sector. We have excellent records. Every name, every face, every dream you deemed an acceptable casualty. As Thrax looked at the screen, the room began to hum. The white walls dissolved into a vivid, high-definition immersion of the worlds he had glassed. He wasn't just watching the destruction. He was experiencing the data of it. He felt the oxygen levels drop in the cities he'd bombarded. He heard the frequency of the screams modulated into a singular, crushing tone. "We don't torture, Commander," Kay continued, his tone clinical and exhausted. "We simply ensure you never forget. We have medical technology that will keep you alive far longer than nature intended, just so you have the time to process the mathematics of your crimes. You'll spend the next several centuries in this room, reviewing every life on our red list until the weight of their absence becomes as real to you as it is to us." Thrax's scales rippled in a sickly, transparent gray. The arrogance that had fueled his 300-cycle career was evaporating, replaced by the realization that he wasn't being punished by a military force. He was being audited by a species that viewed war as a solvable problem, and mercy as a luxury he had forfeited. "Why?" Thrax whispered, his voice cracking. "Why go to such lengths for a primitive world?" Agent K stood up, adjusting his tie with a slow, deliberate movement. "Because we aren't just protecting Earth from you, Commander. We're the only thing standing between the galaxy and the things Earth created to survive. We wear these suits and speak in diplomatic phrases because the alternative is letting the monsters out of their cages permanently." Kay walked toward the door, which appeared seamlessly in the white wall. "Your fleet has already begun its retreat. They'll be given a memory wipe and a very large bill for the damages. But you get the truth." Kay stepped out, the room began to shift again. The white walls turned into the deep, dark void of the Pacific floor. Thrax looked up and saw the Pacific entity, the thing that unmakes reality, leaning down toward him. "Welcome to Phase 3. Kay's voice echoed one last time. The unveiling. The clinical white walls of the interrogation room did not just dissolve. They tore away like wet paper, revealing the staggering reality that the Bureau of Silence had kept hidden for millennia. Commander Thrax found himself suspended in a void of shimmering quantum probability, looking down at a holographic map of the Sol system that pulsed with ancient, rhythmic energy. Beside him, Agent K stood unfazed, his black suit pristine even as the fabric of space-time warped around them. "You think we are an agency of spies and accountants, Thrax?" K said, his voice echoing with a depth that suggested he was speaking through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You think the men in black are here to hide the fact that humans are powerful? You are half right. We are not an agency. We are the wardens of the galaxy's most dangerous high-security prison, Earth." K gestured toward the hologram of Earth. The planet's surface peeled away in layers, revealing deep continental fault zones, oceanic trenches, and polar ice caps that were not merely geological features but containment seals. "Earth is a Class 12 death world," K explained, citing the Galactic classification for planets where every biological factor is designed to cause maximum trauma. "It is a world where gravity, weather, and microbial life are so hostile that merely existing there constitutes a military training exercise. But humans didn't just evolve there. We survived by making pragmatic arrangements with the things that ruled that hell before us." Suddenly, the void around them filled with the screams of the legacy assets. Thrax saw the Arctic dragon unfurling wings the size of battlecruisers, its scales gleaming with an iridescent sheen that absorbed all light. He saw the metal titans, biomechanical hybrids built from living metal, their eyes burning with the intensity of fusion reactions. Finally, he saw the Pacific entity, a horror of molecular chains and quantum probability that existed partially outside of normal space-time. "These are the monsters your invasion nearly unleashed," K said, his eyes hard behind his dark glasses. "We kept them locked away for 8,000 years because we feared what they represent. We built a peaceful diplomatic society because we chose to, not because we were incapable of violence. We are apex predators who happen to develop table manners." Thrax trembled as he realized the true scale of his mistake. The Vraxian Hegemony hadn't attacked a primitive world. They had kicked the door of a cage containing the universe's most ancient nightmares. The men in black weren't protecting Earth from the galaxy. They were the only thing preventing humanity from reverting to its primal nature, the species that paints its walls with the entrails of those who threaten their family. "We prefer diplomacy because fighting is expensive, tragic, and wasteful," K remarked, stepping closer to the shivering commander. "We smile because we are happy, not because we lack teeth. But when you broke my tablet, you reminded us that some civilizations don't understand kindness unless it is backed by the threat of total annihilation." K reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, silver cylinder. The neuralizer. "The galaxy isn't ready for the truth, Thrax. They aren't ready to know that their favorite back-row diplomats are actually the jailers of gods." "You're going to make me forget?" Thrax whispered, a strange sense of relief washing over him. "I'm going to make everyone forget," K replied. "We're going to reset the hegemony's memory, balance the books, and go back to being the nice guys who apologize when you step on our toes." Agent K raised the device. "But first, we have to finish the final audit." The shimmering void of the shadow treasury began to contract, pulling the fabric of reality back into the sterile white confines of the interrogation room. Commander Thrax sat paralyzed, his primary and secondary hearts hammering against his ribs in a discordant rhythm of terror. Agent K stood before him, the silver cylinder of the neuralizer held with the practiced ease of a man who had ended 1,000 wars with a single click. "You asked why we go to such lengths," K said, his voice returning to its calm, bureaucratic cadence. "It's because peace is a choice that only works when everyone chooses it. We've spent 47 years as model citizens of the galactic community, offering humanitarian aid and negotiating treaties, while the rest of you assumed our kindness was a sign of developmental weakness. But kindness is not the same as an inability to wage war." Kay adjusted his dark glasses, the lenses reflecting the cold, clinical light of the room. "We don't want to rule the galaxy, Thrax. Ruling is expensive and the paperwork is a nightmare. We prefer the back row because it allows us to see the truth of the room while everyone else is busy performing for the front. But since you forced us to show you the monsters in our basement, we have to balance the books." The final audit. The logistical reset. Every Vraxian ship in the Sol system was systematically prepared for a forced jump back to hegemony space. Their navigation logs were purged, replaced with data suggesting a catastrophic spatial anomaly had disabled their fleet. The administrative fee? The Bureau's accountants didn't just stop the invasion. They finalized a series of economic sanctions that would redirect 40% of the hegemony's mineral output to the reconstruction of the human colonies they had threatened. The memorial invoice? A formal physical document was placed in Commander Thrax's command chair. It was an itemized bill for the administrative costs of the engagement, including a line item for the replacement of a custom-built Father's Day tablet. "This is the mercy we offer," Agent K whispered, stepping toward the shivering commander. "You will go home. Your people will remember a misunderstanding with a spatial rift. You will continue to believe that humans are just polite, back-row diplomats who provide excellent agricultural consulting. You will never know that you were seconds away from being vaporized by a species that was practicing violence long before it learned table manners." Thrax looked up, his voice a mere croak. "And if anyone ever tries again?" Kay's smile finally appeared, but it was the sharp, unsettling smile of an apex predator that had already calculated the final outcome of the universe. "Then we stop being accountants and we send the admirals. And as you've seen, our admirals don't like to talk." A brilliant flash of white light erupted from the silver cylinder. The new status quo 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council session convened in its massive amphitheater. In the front rows, the high-tier species postured and debated, their wings and tentacles unfurled in displays of diplomatic dominance. In the very back row, Tier 297, 5 humans sat quietly. Agent K was sipping coffee from a new mug that read, "World's Greatest Auditor." Beside him, Priya was scrolling through a datapad, her fingers moving with the precision of a tactical analyst. They watched the room, tracking the subtle heartbeats and nervous tremors of the Vraxian delegates, who were sitting 2 rows ahead and seemed oddly focused on being very, very polite. "They're learning," Jackson murmured, her eyes tracking a Krell sub-delegate reaching for a diplomatic pouch. "Everyone learns eventually," Agent K replied, leaning back and looking out over the entire assembly. "Some just require a more thorough audit than others." The galaxy continued its eternal dance, oblivious to the fact that the balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had been recalculated. The humans remained in the back row, patient and watchful, the silent wardens of a peace built on spreadsheets and backed by nightmares. The conference hall of Eternal Accord had seen 12,000 years of diplomatic victories, but the last few cycles felt like the dawn of a new, unsettling era. Vix, the protocol officer, stood at his station, watching the various delegations file into the massive amphitheater. The front rows were still filled with the traditional displays of dominance, wings spreading, scales rattling, and eyes gleaming, but the atmosphere had changed. The back row was no longer a place for the unimportant. It had become the most sought-after position in the chamber. Agent K was there, seated in Tier 297 as he had been since the humans first arrived. He wasn't a general or a high commander, he was a specialist in a world that had finally learned that real power wasn't about where you sat, but what you could see. Vix approached the human delegation during a recess, noting that Agent K was calmly reviewing a data tablet titled Logistical Efficiency in Post-War Reconstruction. "The Vraxian Hegemony has officially signed the new trade agreements," Vix said quietly, bowing his head in respect. "They've agreed to every administrative fee and every reparation on your list." "Good," Kay replied, his eyes hidden behind his dark glasses as he took a sip of coffee. "Cooperation is always more profitable than conflict, provided everyone understands the mathematics of the alternative." Vix thought about the legacy assets. The Arctic dragons and metal titans Kay had revealed were still resting beneath the ice of their Death World home. He realized that the Bureau of Silence hadn't just won a battle. They had demonstrated that the most dangerous species in the galaxy was the one that almost never got angry, but was absolutely devastating when it finally arrived at that point. "Is it true?" Vix asked, his voice barely a whisper, "that you have a detailed list of every address for every being who authorized the original invasion?" "We have excellent records," Kay said with that unsettling, polite smile. "Humanity learned a long time ago that half measures only guarantee future conflicts, so we don't do half measures anymore." Vix looked around the hall, seeing the Krell and Valdrine delegations now watching the back row with a mixture of respect and existential dread. He understood then that the cardinal rule of warfare had been rewritten for the entire galaxy. Never, ever judge a species by how they act in peacetime. The age of the grand warrior cultures was ending. The age of the accountants with warships had begun. "We're just diplomatic protection," Lieutenant Jackson added from the seat next to Kay, her eyes scanning the room for patterns and truth. "You should see our actual military when they stop playing nice." Kay stood up, adjusted his black jacket, and prepared to depart the hall one final time. "We'll stay in the back row, Vix," he said pleasantly. "Someone needs to keep an eye on things and remind the galaxy to choose wisely." As the humans walked toward the exit, leaving only their spreadsheets and their quiet certainties behind, Vix realized that the humans were the only species that genuinely regretted their victories. They were predators who had chosen to become diplomats because they understood that the only other alternative was their own extinction. They were the wardens of their own monsters, and as long as they sat in the back row, the galaxy was safe. As long as it didn't give them a reason to move to the front.